Um, we are able to do all the programming because we receive grants from the Fairfield Foundation, from the Central Berkshire Fund, the Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation. The local cultural councils give us funding for our storytelling and our museum passes. So any chance you have to support them or give them thanks, please do that. We are excited for the mushrooms. I've been out walking a bunch this past week, enjoying the weather before it snows one of these days, where I can actually see mushrooms. And there's a lot out there still. I was surprised how much. I've been talking with John off and on for a couple of months, so I'm excited to meet him in person. And I'm going to turn it over to you now, John.
Hi there, I'm John Wheeler. I am the president of the Berkshire Mycologist Society. There used to be one years ago, and the guy who did it, who was the president, died. So it was like, I tried to join, and I said, oh, it doesn't exist anymore. So I came back from California. I'm from Great Barrington, and I came back from California in 1988, and used to go to this great bar in Glendale called Mundy's, and there was this really bad drunk, and I gave him a ride home one night to get him out of the hair of the bartender, and he called me the next day and said, I need a ride, man, the honeys are out. And I said, what are honeys? And he said, really good mushrooms. My uncle told me they're all over the mountain. We went over to Fairtown Mountain up behind Oak and Spruce, and sure enough, could have picked probably 1,000 pounds of mushrooms that day. The honey mushrooms come up in profusion, and they're all genetically identical. They come from the underground mat of threads called mycelium. The mycelium goes into the trees, and this in particular is a parasitic mushroom, and it'll kill trees as well as growing off of old dead roots and stuff like that. So it's really prolific, and it's an enemy of the foresters. And we have also picked one mushroom called bear's head tooth, which looks like icicles hanging off the side of a tree. And we went and tasted those, and I said, why would anybody buy up store-bought mushroom if you can get these tastes from the wild? And so along the way I said, well, what's this mushroom? He says, oh, I don't know, we don't eat those. And I said, what's this mushroom? I don't know, we don't eat those. We know about 5 or 6 mushrooms. He was a second generation Italian. He was Comali, and he was, really into making wild food. He picked a whole bunch of little ones this big, and I said, what are you doing with those? I had like a grocery bag full of them. And he says, oh, this is for my antipasto. I don't like them when they get bigger. They were still okay when they were bigger, but not great. So anyway, I got totally fascinated with it, and I had to know what all these mushrooms were. Because I'd go out in the woods, and I'd see mushrooms. I'd never really seen mushrooms before. When I was a kid, I used to go down and hang out at that pond, which is pretty much a stagnant pond. We'd go down and skate there in the wintertime. And I never saw a mushroom, not one. And then I come back from California, and I learn a little bit about mushrooms, and I go down there, and they're absolutely everywhere. That's the most prolific place that I found in Berkshire County. Going around that pond, I can find 120 mushrooms on a good day. Different species, not just 120 mushrooms. I'm talking about 120 different species going around that pond and up and down this trail that I go on. And I have ADD, and I listen to NPR all the time, and this woman says, ADD is not attention deficit, it's hyperattention, it's survival. It's you learn as much as you can about things until you realize, or you feel that you've got enough under your belt so that you can survive with this information. And she said people with ADD are really good at hunter-gatherer and really good at trivia, because you remember everything, because it's like, you suck it in, it's amazing. And then another thing about it is, it's the hunter-gatherer part of your brain is really, really in tune with what's food and what's dangerous. And if you don't see it as food and you don't see it as danger, it's just background noise. And I lived my whole life up to that point with all this background noise I never knew was there. And it turned me on to my observational skills, and I see so much now. Anyway, I've been doing it for 33 years now, and I love it. Mushrooms are like a raspberry on a raspberry bush, or an apple on a tree. It's a fruiting body. Everything else is underground or inside the trees, and the majority of that is communicating constantly from one end of the forest area they're associated with to the other. and they actually transfer all this information underground, and they're living happily underground, and they'll come out and they'll start attacking each other if they touch each other, if they're different species. But up on the left-hand side is a white-pored chicken of the woods that grows at the base of oak trees, and that's the only way I've ever seen it. Most of the chicken of the woods have yellow pores, and they're usually shelf mushrooms, and you see a lot of them, and they'll grow on a lot of dead ash trees and different types of trees. But these guys here in particular, if you're into it for the food, that's the superior mushroom. It's much more tender all the way down. I find chicken of the woods kind of distasteful and chalky if you get too far into them. Lots of times you can see that it has nice, looks like moist edges there, and you cut across those until you come to resistance, and after that it's just like, why bother? On the upper right-hand side is a white pine associate, and it's called painted swirlus. And it's got a secondary fungus on the one on the right. It's going to eat it and turn it into another fruiting body, but it won't be able to put out any spores. There are a bunch of swirluses that are white pine associates. Some people say that this is the best within the genus, but I usually cut across the stem and I find maggots in them, and I just say, forget it. On the lower left-hand side, you have an oak associate, although I know people in Cape Cod and that area, they look for beech and hemlock, but I find them around oak trees around here. Black trumpets are called poor man's truffle, and that means it's a really kind of, has a wonderful, almost aphrodisiac smell to it. But it's also called trumpet de mort, trumpet of death in French, probably to scare people away from their favorite mushrooms. They used to sell them for 99 bucks a pound at Guido's. Morels, most people know morels. They're a springtime mushroom, and around here I find them around ash trees. And if you're lucky enough to find an elm tree that had died within the last couple of years, you might get a massive flush of these things. There are smaller ones. There's several different varieties of them. But most of the time I just look for an ash forest, and I go looking through there in the middle of June. Usually Mother's Day is really peak for finding those. Upper left-hand corner, you might be walking through the woods and you'll see this red stuff, and it looks like somebody blew their nose all over it. So that's it's the stalked puffball in aspic, and that aspic kind of gooey stuff will evaporate or dry up over the year, and it'll end up being really tall. Not an edible mushroom. That's a pigskin puffball. That's a poisonous puffball. It has a blue interior or a black interior, very, very tough skin. And there's other ones that are close to it, other sclerodermas that are smooth-skinned. They're all poisonous, but there's actually a parasitic bolete that will come off of that, and people eat that bolete, and it's not poisonous. You see lots of times you'll see sticks in the woods, and they'll have this white crust on it. And if you look really closely, it has little teeth, and they call that milk tooth, polypore. And then lots of times you'll be walking around, you'll see trees that are covered in cup funguses, and this happens to be a very, very juicy looking one, but none of those guys are edible if you're into it for the food. Now, every mushroom is like a flower. It's got its hosts, and it has its seasons. I mean, the morels are in the spring. There's mushrooms that are midsummer. There's mushrooms that are triggered by the very cold weather. Some people say that mushrooms are really smart and they don't fruit until the cold weather because they know that the fungus flies will stop laying eggs, and they'll have a chance to come to full fruition and survive it to be able to put out as many spores as they can. Anyway, this little guy here is a moss associate, and it's called a lactarius. You see kind of like a ring on the cap. That means I usually look at the top of a mushroom, and if I see there's rings on it, 95% of the time it's going to be a lactarius, which means if you break it open, it'll have a little milk come out of it. This is called the green-headed jelly baby. Usually you see yellow-headed jelly babies, but this is an oak associate, midsummer to late summer. Usually you see them beginning of July, and this is a great indicator that you can find black trumpets nearby because it's an oak associate. This one here is a what's called foliota. They're very, they have a lot of flakes and stuff like that on their caps and stems. So just think of leafy foliate. Now, some people eat some of them. I don't. My wife cries every time. I used to cry every time I tried a new mushroom. So I said, if I can find it in 3 books, and it says it's edible and there's no lookalikes, I can try it. But she still be really stressed out and stuff like that. After a while, 3 years later, she says, we don't eat edible mushrooms anymore. I said, what do you mean? She says, we eat the good, excellent, or choice ones. The edible ones are just bleh. Those are probably, you know, there's a whole group of mushrooms that I always joke called russelas because they're so crumbly. I say the Russians are the only people who eat them. They'll boil them 3 times and pickle them and eat them in the wintertime with vodka. This is a pretty bad shot of it, but that's actually a spring mushroom, one of the earliest ones, and I harvest these in usually mid to late June. And those are what our version of reishi, which is the mushroom of immortality. Canaderma lucidum grows on oaks in China, but this grows on dead hemlock around here. It's got a lot of the same medicinal properties, and I drink a tea of it every day. But they are an annual. A lot of the polypores that you see, you know, they look like they have growth rings on them because they actually put a new pore surface on the bottom of the mushroom every year. But this guy here, these ones grow 1 year, they're done, and usually by July they start having a lot of little creatures crawling in and out, and then start getting moldy and stuff like that. So I try to harvest those early and dehydrate as many as I can every year. This is a little brown cup fungus, Piziza or Piziza badia. Some people say it tastes like morels, but I find morels at that time, so I eat the morels. I'm not going to take a chance on something that might taste like morels. This is our Pleurotus austriatus. Used to be, you know, when there were lots of elms around, this was a major decayer of them, but since there aren't so many elms around anymore. These grow mostly, when I'm looking for mushrooms, I'm looking for these, I'm looking for dying or dead maple trees. Sugar maples, they just love sugar maples. Used to be a stump outside the brewery in Great Barrington. And over the years, I probably picked 50 pounds of those off of it. It just came back year after year after year, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year, depending on how much rain. Those can be found any time of the year. I swear to God, I was driving up the road one January, and it was a real rainy couple of days, and it was kind of 50 degrees, and all of a sudden it went back down to, you know, 20 degrees, and I'm driving by this house, and I said, it looks like fresh oyster mushrooms. And I went to work, and I came back, and they were still there, and I went over, and I broke them off, and stuck them in my car, and brought them home, threw them in the freezer, and dehydrated one at a time, and cooked it up. It was delicious. But they're basically a wood rotter. They live off of dead tissue. There are certain mushrooms that are called saprobic mushrooms. Those are the ones that live off dead tissue. There's mushrooms called mycorrhizal mushrooms, which actually feed and water the trees. Some trees get 50 to 80% of the water and nutrients from mushrooms. You won't find that with maples. Maples have really, really fine root hairs, but most of the conifers and oaks and a lot of the softwoods really depend on mushrooms to bring around food and nutrients. Actually, mushrooms will kill off pathogens in the trees. They're very territorial for their hosts. They want to keep them alive. So mushrooms are actually the forest managers. So the saprobic ones will break it down into the soil, and the other ones will feed it back into the forest. But but anyway, mycorrhizal mushrooms are usually not going to be showing up if you're looking through the year until, say, June, late June, when the leaves really start pumping out sugars. It's the exchange system they have. This is a beefsteak polypore that has a lemony flavor to it. You find sometimes at the base of oak trees, and it's a slow pathogen. It's killing the tree slowly, and that's usually late July, August, September. This mushroom here is bear's head tooth, and it looks like icicles hanging off the side of a tree. And I usually find it on dead beech. I have found it on shagbark hickory a couple of times, oak a couple of times, I think ash one time, and birch trees I found it on, but not very often. Most of the time, if you know where there's a nice beech forest that's not dying, walk around those big old logs, and you'll probably find one of these on there. And if you cut it off and it's nice and white all over, and the teeth aren't too long, and you saute up little chunks of it, and you'll say, my God, this is like crab meat, and it's so delicious. It was the first mushroom that I ate with honey mushrooms, and that is my absolute favorite mushrooms of them all, because I do love seafood. Here's a parasitic mushroom down here growing off of a blackening russula, and Obviously, it has to wait until the rustler grows before that has its season, and it's usually midsummer to late summer when you see those. Oops. So, mushrooms have different types of spore dispersal. There's ascomycetes and basidiomycetes. And ascomycetes have a lot of cup funguses and morels, have like all these little holes in them called perithecia. And in that, down that hole, there's usually 8 to 9 spores. And the cup fungus, sometimes you get one of those brown cup funguses and put them in your hand and kick them up, and all of a sudden it goes off and you have a handful of smoke. It's amazing because of the humidity of your hand, you change the atmosphere, and they say, oh, time to go. So anyway, these are little orange cup funguses. They call them orange peel cup. Usually little, so they say they're edible, but I don't like go for the stuff where it would take you a dozen to have an actual taste of them, because they're 90% water. Same thing with brown cup funguses. This is a dead man's finger, not an edible mushroom, but it's an ascomycete. This is a little blue mushroom called Pleurosaboria aeruginosa, or aeruginescens, and that is that mushroom that makes all the wood blue that you see in the woods. When you're walking along and see old rotten beech trees and stuff, or birch trees, and you'll see all the blue in it. It's that little guy, and they're out all over the place right now after the rain. They're just like about maybe 1/8 of an inch across and about 1/8 of an inch high, but they have such great color. And this is actually a slime mold. It's not it's not an asco. And this is again green-headed jelly babies. And then you have earth tongues. Earth tongues are, and this is a cordyceps growing on a underground deer truffle. And these are cup funguses, little teeny tiny yellow cup funguses that are probably no more than 1/8 of an inch across at the most. And these ones here are called elven saddles, and those are in the family of Gyromitra, which is like the false morel that you see in the spring. But these are summertime mushrooms, and they, as you can see, they're oak leaves around it, so it must be an oak forest loving mushroom. But there's lots of different ascos, and I consider them the more primitive mushrooms. I may be wrong, but they kind of like remind me of ocean polyps and stuff. They just shoot them out with one tube. And mushrooms came out of the ocean before the plants started growing. Basidiomycetes, usually you think of gill mushrooms and boletises, which are like the porcini mushroom, but also these tooth mushrooms and coral mushrooms and polypores are all basidiomycetes. And they have a spore-bearing surface will have little protrusions, and there'll be either 2 or 4 spores on the end of that protrusion, and they'll shoot them off about 250 miles an hour to get out away from the gills and out into the atmosphere. Lots of colors in mushrooms. I like to say, you know, I love the food, but I'm so much more interested in just picking a wide variety of mushrooms and having a beautiful basket full of great colors. And then my bent in the club is to sort everything out into genus, photograph them and count them and put them on the Facebook so everybody can see what's out there. And lots of times I get the IDs on a lot of them, sometimes I don't. But these are 2 different varieties of Clavariopsis. This one is Clavariopsis fusiformis, comes up in clusters like that. But this one here is a different one. Because of the color, they call it Aurantios cinnabarina. They're both like spindle coral, and you see them off in the forest. These are all russulas, I would say. That reminds me of going to Florida in the 60s, all those nice pastel houses everywhere. Very, very pretty pastel-y colored mushrooms. Most of them are so brittle that they'll crumble under the weight of your fingers. That's why I say that Russians are the only people who go out and eat them. They have terrible mouthfeel. And I got a call from a professor out in the Midwest one time. Judith Lerner did a talk with me at the Berkshire Eagle, and somebody sent me the article. It says, do you eat russulas? I said, no, the texture is horrible. There's just no, you know, it must fall apart in your mouth if you try to cook it up and eat it. He said, no, do like the Russians, you boil them and pickle them. And then you follow them with shots of vodka during the wintertime. You get lots of vitamin D. But he was actually looking for chanterelles, and looking for collections of chanterelles because they were collecting them to find which ones had the highest vitamin D content, you know. And he said that the highest content in North America so far had been Steventown, New York. And he was wondering if I'd give him a couple of samples from the Berkshires. And I said, what are you doing this for? He says, well, we're going to send, you know, try to find really good collections and then send them to the South Pole so the people down there get some nice fresh vitamin D in their food instead of going through the processed, you know, vitamin D pill, which might not metabolize as well. Food will metabolize better. And there's a place in France, someplace, where people actually overdose from the vitamin D in the chanterelles that they're eating. So that you can get some really powerful vitamin D from mushrooms. All kinds of micronutrients that you can't get in other places are very, very rare in other sources. And these here, this is a slime mold. This doesn't look as scrambled eggs as lots of times, so they call this one dog vomit slime. And this is what happens to it after a while. You see that a lot of times on your wood chips, but sometimes you're out in the woods and you find a different variety. It's like beautiful, bright, bright yellow. These little guys here, I know it's kind of hard to see, but these are actually eyelash cup funguses, and they have little hairs around the outside edges of the cup. I was with Simon's Rock doing, helping as a lab assistant for Simon's Rock, my college class. And we came in with a bunch of mushrooms from the field, and the kids were all looking at their mushrooms, and I was looking at one of these cup funguses, and it was only about 1/8 of an inch across, and I got it under the dissecting scope, and there's this beautiful little, perfect, golden, shiny beetle in there, trying desperately to get out of the glutinous mass, and the hairs are folding in. So these guys live on almost rotted to death wood, and there's not much nutrition left in there, and they're supplementing their nutrition with a little protein. This is an oak-loving mushroom called Gyroporus cyanescens, because it turns blue when you open it up. A lot of people say, oh, if it's a bluing mushroom, it must be psychedelic. Not so. You know, some of these bluing mushrooms will kill you. But this one here in particular happens to be an edible one. I've only found it a couple of times, but I know a lot of people would find it because you get down into Connecticut, there's a lot more oak forest, and I go to forays down there with like 150 people sometimes. All the clubs from the Northeast get together once a year. When I'm looking at mushrooms, I can tell lots of times just by the stature of the mushroom which group of mushrooms it's going to be in. Coral mushrooms are quite obvious. This one over here, the lovely straight stalk and the skirt on the stem and the little ornamentations on the top and a nice umbrella shape. That's one stage of that. Of course, it was like a little ball at first, and it'll go all the way up to being that. But that straight stalk and the veil, and if I can see the white gills, I know it's going to be an amanita. Just mushrooms that I see, like I was saying before, you've got the zone 8 caps on the lactarius. You can just tell by looking at the tops of them. Some of them, like these little guys here with the pointy tops, this is a unicorn entoloma, and these are salmon entolomas. Those are poisonous mushrooms, and they look a lot like these little guys here, which are waxy caps. And these guys are not. Like people say, well, are they edible? I said, if you had 100 of those, you might get one bite. So why bother you thinking about that? Once you go to this one here, which is a porcini, and this is a type, this is a real porcini. This is from underneath Norway spruce. I think Linnaeus was probably, being Norwegian or Swedish, he probably saw these as his primary boletus. And this is the mushroom that everybody all over the world searches for. But the type species came, I think, from Norway spruce. And this is a meaty mushroom. And when they're young, they're hard as nice, they're solid. When they get older and the pores start getting longer, they start out with white pores, and then they get yellow pores, and then they get green pores. And then slowly but surely, the pores on the bottom will get longer, and the what's called the context, or the meat of the cap, will get softer and softer. There's names for it in every language in the world. I mean, they call them penny buns in England. They call them ceps in France. Call them Steinpilz, stone mushroom in German, and porcini, which means little pig in Italian. Odor. I used to tell all the kids, take a whiff of the mushroom. Your olfactory memory is one of those primal things where you can, how many people have you heard a song and all of a sudden got a whiff of it past? How many of you have gotten a whiff of something and then, a whole memory comes flashing back? Well, this one here, my friends always said, it smells like puppy's breath or baby's breath. Now this is the poor man's truffle. This is mildly aphrodisiac, some people say. But he said he always got luckier when he brought some of those home. This is a mushroom. This is a stinkhorn. Stinkhorns have a reproductive system where they have their spores on the outside, and flies come and take them away and spread them around into different areas. And they come out of looks like an egg. It looks like a testicle. It's got an egg and a little long stringy bit of mycelium coming off of them. And the Chinese have these, for sale, but they smell awful. But there's, holds tradition for the Chinese. But if you take one of those eggs and cut it in half before it opens up, it's got like a kernel inside of there. And if you take that kernel out and nibble on it, it tastes just like radishes. This mushroom is a chanterelle. I think that at least in the Berkshires, in the area I'm from, there's a lot of different varieties. But this one in particular, I smell pumpkin when I smell them. You go to other parts of the country and they smell like apricot. And there's this smooth chanterelle which grows not in the Berkshires, or at least my part of the Berkshires, but out in the valley and over into New York State, where the soil types are different. I think they like the shale soil, and we have the limestone soil in the Berkshires, so we get different varieties. This one smells mildly fishy or, just sweet, and it's a wonderful mushroom. This mushroom here, people actually make biscotti. They'll dry it and powder it up and use it as flavoring to make the almond flavor of biscotti. But you got other things. This little guy here with the blue stem, that's poisonous mushroom. That's an entoloma. And like those unicorn entolomas, instead of having a pointy top, it has an indented top. It's called Leptonia incana. And it says, in the guidebook, it says it smells like mouse urine. I'm a carpenter. I have opened many walls, and that smells exactly like mouse urine. Now these guys here aren't, I like that, they have no smell, but if you took a nibble of one of these guys, flat top coral, you swear to God you just bitten into a bag of saccharin. It makes mannitol, and people actually powder that up and make cookies with it and sweeten it with that mushroom. And they start out looking like those hot air balloons, and then they get flat tops on them. And usually by the time they get really flat, they're full of bugs. So it's nice to get them when they're nice and young. And oyster mushrooms smell a lot like fish. Unless, of course, you get them from poplar or aspen in the springtime, in which case they'll smell like anise. It's a different species. This is Pleurotus austratus, which means oyster mushroom. And the other ones are called populinus, after the trees associated with. This mushroom here, people say it smells like red hots and dirty socks. It's very spicy smelling, and definitely cinnamon-like. And it's a mushroom that if you try to cut through it, it squeaks. It's so dense. And if you were on the West Coast and you came down from the mountains with a basket full of those, there'd be brokers at the bottom of the hill ready to give you $40 a pound. They bring them to the airport, ship them overnight to Japan, and start auctioning them off at $100 a pound. And supposedly there's one prefecture in Japan where they go for $1,000 a pound. Very fragrant, very flavorful. Japanese people will take them, slice them up real thin, and put them between layers of tin foil and put them in the freezer. And they'll take one piece and put it on their rice when they're cooking it for flavor. And people, I've heard of people having a presentation box and bringing one for a dinner guest, They're very, very highly regarded. And I've only found one spot in the Berkshires to do it, but I was looking at the streams along here, and if you've got a fast-moving stream and you've got hemlock, there's chances you can go out there and find them right now. And those are really, really good if you're just like thin sliced and sauteed up with like a peanut oil or something like that. Amazing. And this mushroom here I found, I was doing a class yesterday, and I brought some of those with me, and then we found some more, but they smell so much like nice coconut. It's like, oh, it's some pina colada here. Unfortunately, it's a very acrid mushroom. When you're looking in a field guide book, and they'll talk about the cap texture. So you get scaly caps, and you get cracked caps. There's actually a mushroom called the cracked cap elite. And this is one, just what's happening is just expanding, and you see the context, the meat underneath there. And this one here, these foliotas are very, very scaly looking. They call that squamose or squarules. And this is a striate cap where you can see through the top of the cap the shape of the gills. And so this is actually an amanita, but it has no veil. It has the striate edges. It has the remnant veil on the top, all this little stuff. It came out of an actual like little egg shape before it came out of the ground. And as it expanded, that initial universal veil that's over everything breaks up into that. And then if you dig up really carefully and get the base out, you'll find the cup that it came out of, which is what that little veil is on top. So anyway, these, I would not recommend anybody, unless you've been doing it for many, many years, eating one of these, what's called grisette. And they're very, very distinctive. Apparently they're all edible, but I do not recommend anybody eating an amanita because amanitas can kill you. If you get a wrong one, you get a trip to the hospital and maybe a new liver. These guys here are poisonous mushrooms too. There are a lot of late fall mushrooms called fiber caps. Some of them are like torn fiber caps like this, and other ones don't have that tearing, but they definitely have fibers on the caps, and they have somewhat grayish gills, somewhat brownish gills, but they're, one or two of them are supposedly hallucinogenic, but I wouldn't think of anything about trying one. Now this is the abortive entoloma. When we were up hunting honey mushrooms, these guys were all over the place. These looked like giant hominy grits all blowing up. And I was saying, what's this? He says, oh, I don't know. And then I said, well, what's this mushroom? He says, I don't know, we don't eat that. So this mushroom is actually attacking the honey mushroom, mycelium, underground, just as it's starting to fruit, and totally turning this mushroom into a non-fruiting body. And people call this part here shrimp of the woods. When they're young and firm, they got some good texture and mushroomy flavor. I've only eaten them twice. But I know people who get bushel baskets of them and bring them to the city and bring them to the restaurants, and they'll sit there and spend the time cleaning them, cooking them up. So like I was saying, they pretty much live happily together underground, but once they start to fruit, they'll attack each other, change each other chemically, and all kinds of stuff goes on. Flacos or powdery caps, there's quite a few of them, but not around here. And then here's a zone 8 cap of a Lactarius I was talking about. I could walk through the woods and see a cap that's got the rings on it. I say, that's most likely a Lactarius. There's a lot of dangerous mushrooms out there. I know that America's taught us everything they possibly could on how to fear.
Yeah.
You go to Europe and they're all like going out with their children picking mushrooms, and they all know what it is. They don't want us to know anything. But anyway, it's good to know your poisonous mushrooms. Cortinarius is a group of mushrooms. As you can see right here, it has a like really nice cinnamon brown stain there. Cortina is like, the cortina comes from the name of the veil that Spanish women would wear in the old days, a little like light lacy veil. So it's a very thread-like veil underneath Cortinarius. And they have cinnamon-colored spores and usually cinnamon-colored gills. Although sometimes you can find them that have beautiful purple gills, and they look like, this one will look like a bluet when it's very, very young. And this is a Cortinarius alboviolaceus, so alba, you think of albino, so that's white and purple. And they have a very large stem sometimes, like a bluet, but bluets have pink spores, and these guys have cinnamon-colored spores. And this is a gypsy. We're finding those all over the place today. And that was a mushroom that was Cortinarius, and it was taken out of Cortinarius-shaped spores and possibly some genetic markers that tell them he was a cort, but it does not have cinnamon-colored spores. But that'll definitely take your kidneys out, like for 3 to 14 days. A lot of mushrooms like amanitas, the chemicals in the poisons will get into the cells of your liver, and your liver will decide, oh, this is the enemy of my body, I have to get rid of this liver. So that's why so many people end up, you find a lot of Asiatic families coming here, and they pick mushrooms that look a lot like a paddy straw mushroom in Southeast Asia, and it turns out to be a poisonous amanita, and you end up with like 15 people dying in the same family. And I think that there was a nursing home in California not too many years ago where somebody cooked up mushrooms for the people in the nursing home, and quite a few of them died. But the Horse Whisperer, the guy who wrote The Horse Whisperer, he and his family were in Italy, no, in Ireland, and they were picking mushrooms that they thought was one kind of mushroom, and they picked this guy here, and they all ended up, 2 of them ended up with liver transplants, and I know they were all on dialysis for a while. Not a good mushroom. This is the most deadly mushroom we have right there, that beautiful white mushroom with big bulbous base. That's a destroying angel. And quite a few of them here that will be make you very, very sick. Now, this mushroom here is hen of the woods. They're out around oak trees right now. This is a mushroom that comes out usually late August through November. And when you get them nice and young and tender, even when they're getting older, as long as the stems aren't turning yellow inside and they aren't full of bugs, this is one of the best eating mushrooms there the biggest one I ever got personally was 22 pounds. It's like this big.
Oh.
I've seen a 45 pounder. These three here were over 10 pounds each.
Wow.
And those are on the back of my friend's car, and I will saute lightly. I will bring it down in its own juices and bag it up and throw it in the freezer in meal-sized bags. And we'll dry. I have 3 dehydrators. I'll fill every one of the dehydrators and get them dried, put them away for the winter, and then I still have mushrooms left over to give to the restaurants and neighbors and everybody else. What a good year. This was the most amazing year. I went to a tree and I saw it had 2 hens like that. I took them. And I saw there were a couple of little ones around the other side. I went back a week later and I took 5. And they were all between 2 and 3, 4 pounds. And then I went back 2 weeks later and there was still more coming. So I probably got 12 hens in the woods off of that tree. If I'd let them go to full fruition, full maturity, I probably could have figured it out to be about 40 pounds. But that's good. It's so good. I have them for breakfast. I put them in chili. I put them in spaghetti sauce. I like taking the big fronds and dredging them in teriyaki and olive oil and throw them on the grill until they're kind of like crispy. And it's just so good. These are Rishi's. So anyway, Rafola frondosa there was this guy Greg Marley up in Maine, and he had a woman in his hometown had inoperable brain cancer, and she was going to die in 6 months. He brought her a bushel basket and said, eat them every day, every way. And apparently 6 months later, her brain cancer was gone. Mm-hmm. And I talked to doctors. I was a carpenter, and I did all this work for people, and I would talk to these doctors and people that I was working for, and I talked about mushrooms. And they said, oh, that's all anecdotal evidence. But now we had a woman come to our B&B when we were doing the B&B, and I fed her that for breakfast and her eggs. She says, oh, they give that in pill form, along with turkey tails and along with shiitake, and it keeps the cancer away. She had breast cancer. She was on that for therapy. And this is reishi. This is a mushroom of immortality in Chinese medicine. It's anti-carcinogenic, anti-tumor, antiviral, antibiotic. It's a liver tonic, a kidney tonic, a blood sugar regulator. It's a cholesterol reducer. Mm-hmm. It's an anti-inflammatory. It's a mild stimulant. It's a mild relaxant. And a few other things. The only thing on the list is that it's not a sexual potentiator. If you want that, you do shiitakes or cordyceps. And this is the Russian equivalent of this here. This is the highest antioxidant in medicine, in nature. If you know the thing about blueberries and shiitakes being super high in antioxidants, that's 100 times more powerful. Mm-hmm. And they give, if you have cancer, I put it in a tea with this because it takes a little bit of bitter out of that. And turkey tails you can find in every continent except Antarctica on old dead trees, and that's a medicinal mushroom. The reason why I get into mushrooms for fine cuisine, I go to forays with a bunch of northeastern clubs, and they have vegans who do all the cooking, so you end up with 15 dishes at my coffee at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And people bring potluck stuff and bring them all kinds of dishes. It's pretty interesting. And then you can do non-culinary uses for medicine, for mushrooms. I know this woman, Rhoda Roper, she's in her 90s now, but she's always been drying the polypores and making earrings and necklaces. And this is an artist comp, just scratched with a stick on a fresh surface. You can see the fingerprints around the edges where he picked it off the tree. But as soon as that pore surface dries out, it'll be like that permanently forever. And this is actually a wood burning on an actual one that had dried out. Now, I know people who are into making fiber art and dyeing with mushrooms. These are all mushroom colors. They go to a symposium in Norway every year, and people come from all over the world, and they will bring their lichens and their flowers and their mushrooms and all the different formulas for making different colors, and they'll have big trade-offs and have a good time. And certain mushrooms that we have around here are extremely good for making dyes. This one here is called semisanguinea, and that one is very easy to make dyes with. And when you're making a dye with this kind of stuff, lots of times the color is very fleeting, so you use what's called a mordant. You add a type of a metal to your soup that you make with that, and it makes it, it fixes it, and it also, depending on whether it's tin, iron, aluminum, and something else, you can change that color, and you can get some great colors from these things. And I go to the forays, and people will do their knitting and bring those stuff that they made from these particular, this is all 3 colors that are made from semi-sanguinea with different mordants. If you're invited to pick at someone's spot, don't go and raid their spot. There's lots of great spots. Find your own areas and enjoy the heck out of it. And the more that you do your own spots, the more you'll discover. Berkshire is one of the best places I've ever been for mushrooming. We have so many different varieties of trees. As I was at a foray one time, this guy says, this area is great. It's got the great coniferous forest of the north, of the south, and the great coniferous of the north and the deciduous of the south meeting, and then it's like a perfect storm in that limestone ridge we have going down through here with all the moisture. We have an incredible amount of variety of mushrooms. I probably found about 1,100 different species, and I don't go for the rusts and the smuts and the little spots on leaves and the tiny little dots on twigs. I'm talking about fleshy mushrooms that you see with your eyes without a microscope. I probably have seen another 200 and never even thought about trying to identify them, all those little ones. And a lot of the polypores, I never even bother doing it. But when you hunt for the table, make sure you leave a few there to spore. And I'd say, as soon as they start opening up, they're putting out spores. This is the stuff that they tell you you're supposed to do. And if you're picking for the table, make sure you clean your mushroom as much as you can before you put it in your basket, because there's nothing worse than coming home and having a pile of dirt and pine needles on top of the pores or the gills in your mushroom because you just threw them in a jumble. I know people who are very careful to put their stuff in with the cap up so that they don't get stuff in the pores. It's nice to just be as clean as you can be on your way out of the woods. If you're given permission to pick on someone's land, show them what's going on there, they'll probably invite you back. Once in a while you come across with some of those new people who say, "Get off my land." Let's see. So, we find morels in the spring, one of the earliest mushrooms we find. And then you find false morels even earlier than that sometimes, which are somewhat poisonous. I know that they produce something called monomethylhydrazine, which is synthesized to make rocket fuel. So if you have a pot of those and you open it up and you take a whiff of it, it might knock you out. And if you cook them wrong or don't cook them long enough and get all of that gyromycin out of them, then you get sick and it could give you cancer over time. People I've met from Germany said, "Oh yeah, we pick them in Germany and we hang them out in the sun on a thread, so that they can dry and it gets rid of all that stuff." But it can really be a cumulative poison from what I understand. So I haven't tried them. And this is the beginning of a spring polypore, and then they'll end up looking like this. And when they're very young, well, anytime that you open them up and smell them, they smell like watermelon rind. So people like to pickle them when they're very young. I know people who like to eat them, but I don't find them very, very palatable. And this is one of the earliest mushrooms you're going to find in ash forests is a scarlet cup. You find them buried in the leaves lots of times. And then you have stinkhorns. This is a stinkhorn. It used to be called Dictyophorus caninus, but now they changed it to Mutinus elegans instead of the dog dick stinkhorn. They call it the elegant stinkhorn. I think I always say that so many of these, so many botanical names, first of all, are referred to anatomical parts lots of times, and I think that most of the names were made during the Victorian sexually repressed era, so I think a lot of names were given giggle factor in their names. And here's that mushroom again, the netted stinkhorn. I call this one the food chain. You got the little fly up here eating the stuff, and this frog's almost the same size, saying, "Can I get that sucker in my mouth?" And then you've got cups. See how big those cups are compared to my pen knife there? That was done years ago. But they can be huge. And apparently, if, they're clean and you can eat them, but I just don't do that. Now this one here is the black morel. I don't like this morel. This one smells like soap. Texturally, it's much more brittle. It doesn't really turn me on like a nice yellow morel does. And this over here you can barely see is called a half-free morel. Same textural issue. This is Exidia rosea, and this is something that I was talking about at a class one time in North Adams, and this guy and his son came over and said, "Oh yeah, in the Boy Scouts we eat that." And I said, "Why?" It's like, well, does it have any flavor? No. This is a little hexagonal poured polypore that's out early in the spring. Inky caps, they come up looking good and then they turn into mush. The ones that are coming out right now that are very big and robust, if you had a beer before, 2 days before or 2 days after, you're going to get hot flashes, nausea, feel awful. They kind of synthesize it to make antabuse to give to alcoholics so they wouldn't drink. And this is just one of the jelly roll mushrooms. There's all kinds of, gross little things out there that you would never want to eat. Some people say that this is edible, but as my wife said, we don't eat edible mushrooms anymore. This is spring of grosky, it grows in wood chip easily. You see them all over the place. I wouldn't try them yet. Wine caps. They're usually nice and burgundy colored when they're little babies, and they have blue gills, just like psilocybin does. It's actually in the same family as psilocybin, but it's not active, but it's good food. You can grab, if you find these in your wood chips or somebody else's wood chips, and you just grab some of that, some of the mycelium wood chips and bring it home, stick in your own wood chips, they just take right off and you'll have them growing at home. And they're good when they're very young. They kind of make their own sauce. They let out a lot of fluid. But I've only eaten them twice, 33 years. This is Tricholomopsis. When you see a word that says opsis, that means it looks like it. So this looks like a tricholoma, but it has yellow gills, and tricholomas have white gills and spores. It's a wood rotter. These are wood rotters. This is oyster mushrooms that I was telling you about on that stump in front of the brewery. They took it down. And these are all pinky caps eating away at the wood down here. This is a spring entoloma. I don't know if you can see the stem, but it has a slight twist to the grain in it. And I can always tell an entoloma by that particular characteristic. But they have pink gills, pinkish gills and pink spores, and they're attached to the stem. Lots of times you'll find mushrooms growing on wood that are pluteous, and they have free gills. They don't actually touch the stem, and they have pink gills. There are not very many mushrooms in the spring. This is probably June. Looking at that reishi there. So this is the collection that we probably spent an hour and a half trying to find. Late May, early June. June is really, really kind of non-existent for mushrooms. At that time of the year, I'm just looking at dead trees and seeing what kind of mushrooms are growing on it, because there's no mycorrhizal mushrooms popping up until the sugars start really pumping out of the trees. Dunce's cap are poisonous. It's a group called Panacity. All of them are poisonous. Pretty little mushroom. This is one of the first russellas of the year. This bicolored russella. I don't know much about eating them, but I do know that this one here, this Rampelina shellfish-scented russella, is sought and hunted all over Montana because it has good texture and it has good flavor. I had one in my car one time for about 3 hours while I was hunting, and I came back and the car stunk of shellfish, but I figured it had been there too long in the heat to go home and try it. I didn't smell it before I went in. This is one of the Lactarius. This is Subpurpureus. It's a very nice swampy Lactarius. You find them, and I ate it once. I don't think I've eaten it since. This is Paradoxus. It looks like a blue milky, but it's got orange gills, and I think it has orange milk. I'm not sure. But this is a blue Lactarius. This is a white pine associate. I tried it. It was bitter. You go down south and you can eat them and they're fine. But I think up in here, depending on the tree species it's associated with, besides the white pine, I think soil type has a lot to do with it. This is a scaly vase chanterelle, which is not a chanterelle, and it is not edible. You see there's a lot out there. And there's waxy caps. There's a lot of waxy caps. They're little teeny tiny, very colorful mushrooms. And you'll see them pretty much any time from June through August to September. They're out now, but they're starting to go away. Actually, right now you're starting to get really big ones, but lots of times, this time of the year, you'll find them and they'll be covered with a slime. And I think that slime on these fall mushrooms is acting antifreeze. So if you get a hard cold night, then most of the mushroom is still, well, you got to realize, even in the hottest part of summer, if you find yourself a nice big fleshy fungi, they're circulating groundwater. And you can take that, put it on your jugular vein, and cool right down. It's like, it's Mushrooms are always cold, you know, even in the hottest part of the day. There's a lot of things out there called slime molds, they're myxomycetes, and they don't have the same kind of spore production as all these other guys do. So they're not really true mushrooms. But they're slime molds, another slime mold. They're all about maybe a half an inch at the longest, these little hairs coming out. This is a group of mushrooms of Amanitas here on the bottom. This is crenulata, Amanita crenulata, that grows in association with the spruces and spruces. This is our version of Amanita muscaria. If you've ever seen fairy tale books and Mario Brothers, the red mushroom with the white spots. Way back in the day, there was somebody called Mithras, apparently, and Mithras was like a god or some character that the Romans and the Greeks knew of or would depict. There'd be a cave you'd go down into, and there'd be a picture of Mithras with his red cap and white spots stabbing through the back of a bull, and in the background would be depicted a conifer. They are conifer associates, and they would eat those mushrooms and go down into the cave. And I think that most anybody I've ever talked to who's ever eaten an Amanita muscaria is thrown up, and they go into a semi-comatose sleep. And when you wake up from that semi-comatose sleep, you realize you're the Christ. We're not talking Jesus Christ. The Christ is the universal spirit that we all are, and everything is. And you have superhuman strength. If you were a berserker back in the days and you ate that thing, that's why you could whip those 30-pound swords around like nothing. The Swedes were going by land while the Vikings were going by sea, but they were eating that before they went into battle. And that's where our religions come from. Almost every religion, Eastern religion, comes from that mushroom. And they were probably doing it long before in societies that were ruled by very, very intelligent, powerful women. This is a destroying angel. The deadliest mushroom we have here comes out of a cup. White gills, white veil. This is an Amanita brunescens, variety alba, but now they've changed the species name. This is the Amanita brunescens, the true one, and they're called cleft-foot Amanita. If you can see a little bit of a split in the base there, that means cleft foot. That's the cleft. This is Amanita rubescens. This has a scallion-shaped stem on it, and people eat this in Europe all the time. I have a friend, Erhard, who came from Europe, Germany, and he says, oh, I eat them all the time in Europe, but I'm afraid to eat them here. See, some people are smart and have fear of mushrooms. It took me 20 years to get over the fear and eat one of those. I knew it, I picked it every year, I said, this is an Amanita rubescens. And I put it in the fridge, and I'd eat everything else and throw that away. But I finally got around to eating a couple of really nice, young, fresh ones, really great shape, and they didn't get me sick. You gotta cook them though. I mean, if you eat them raw, you're gonna be sick for 3 days. All these mushrooms, most of them, every mushroom that you ever want to eat in your life, you want to make sure it's well cooked. Because there's enzymes in mushrooms that can break down trees and leaves and stuff, and then if you go raw into your stomach, they can continue to break down your stomach if they want to. This is the painted pseuilus. This is a dotted stalk pseuilus. This is this is an oyster mushroom. This is a blue lacteria that's been attacked by a secondary fungus, so it's got a hypomyces on it. This little guy here is called a meadow waxicap, and those are really robust and actually big enough to eat. They don't go away when you cook them up. And this is a tricholoma that's out right now called bleeding tricholoma. And then you have the Amanita caesarea, the only one I know of that has yellow gills. And if you were in Italy back in the days of the emperors and you were a peasant and you got caught with those, they'd kill you. If you go to Italy now, before they come out of that little sack there, it looks like a nice little red yolk coming out. They'll ask you if you like some ovolo shaved onto your salad, and they'll put that raw on your salad shaved. It's the only mushroom I know of this group that could ever be eaten raw. There's a few of these here that could be eaten, but I really do not recommend ever eating an amanita until you're so certain that you're never going to make a mistake. This is a mushroom that I actually took a picture of on the New Jersey Turnpike. It was at the Joyce Kilmer truck stop. My hunter-gatherer part of my brain lets me know where every mushroom I ever found is. And you can see here we are driving down the road, and I got my mushroom book on the floor. We were on our way to Baltimore to see my niece, and yeah, I always have my mushroom books with me. And then we have the jack-o'-lantern here. This is a poisonous mushroom that glows in the dark. I've gotten 3 poison calls on that, and people throwing up and having diarrhea. And I said, no, this is not an oyster. It's not chicken of the woods, and it's definitely not a chanterelle. So anyway, they called Dr. Vinegar, the internist in Great Barrington. One of them did and said, what should we do? He says, well, you're going to wish you died, but you won't. It'll be better tomorrow. You can go and throw up and have diarrhea in an emergency room, or you can do it in the comfort of your own home. But it can make you sick for 2 or 3 days if you eat too much of that. And this is a red-mouthed bolete. I'll just tell you, in all the guidebooks, don't eat a red-pored, blue-staining boletus. And then I was up at Mount Greylock talking, and this Hungarian woman says, oh, we eat those all the time. And then Michael Ballin at the Castle Street in Great Barrington, someone brought some into him, he cooked them up, and he thought they were pretty good. And then some young 23-year-old chef at Allium ate some raw, and he was sick for 3 days. So you got to cook your mushrooms. This is another bolete. This has pores on the bottom, and this is called a scaber stalk, and it's associated with usually softwoods like birch and poplar and aspen. And my friend Frank says he dries them, and they taste pretty good. But they're usually pretty soft and slimy if you try to cook them fresh. Russian people told me, always dry your boletes before you eat them, because that way it concentrates the flavor and makes them firm. This is a little hen of the woods. You can see my basket there with my egg crates. So that was probably about a 1-pounder. They can get up to 45, 50 pounds. Polyporus umbellatus. This grows from the sclerotia under the ground, usually associated with beech trees, and will come back year after year. And this has the same medicinal values as a Grifola frondosa, or the maitake, the hen of the woods. Really delicious. Usually June, July, after a really good rain, these will come out. Pretty rare. This is Neenah. This is a couple of Lacarias, these widely spaced gills. This is a little Lacaria lacata you see usually near swamps. They're supposedly edible. I'm not pushing food here. This is the scaber stalk again, and these are the 3 white pine associates. You got the painted suillus and dotted stalk suillus and the chicken fat suillus. The chicken fat suillus is not worth putting in your food. The dotted stalk suillus is a guy, Joe Zernacki, who had a restaurant in Pennsylvania, and he told John Plischke, if you're going to eat those, you better peel the skin off the cap, because if you don't, you'll have an itchy butt the next day. So John proceeded to try it one way, and he tried it the other way, and said, peel the cap. These are hedgehog mushrooms. They're out right now, but they're getting a little old. They're getting a little long in the tooth. They have teeth underneath, the spines, and I have a piece of one over there. And I nibbled on one when it was long in the tooth like that. Yeah, when it comes to the mushrooms like that, when they get older, you want to do a nibble and spit test, because they can get really bitter. It was fine for the first 3 or 4 minutes, and all of a sudden I felt this awful taste on the tip of my tongue. I honestly just touched it to my tongue. And then my stomach started to really hurt, as if my tongue was saying, we got to get rid of that. I thought I was going to throw up. And I just basically tasted it. It's amazing. And these little guys are called sweet tooth. Those are much smaller, and they're out right now. There's a few of them on here, and they're called Hydnum umbilicatum, and they have like a belly button hole down through, so they call them umbilicatum. And they're good when they're young. This is the bluet. They're out all over the place right now. This is the one I was talking about, the violaceous in the Cortinarius family. Looks a lot like this, but this has blue gills, and the color of inside is all the same. If you open up a Cortinarius, it'll be white in the middle. And it also, these guys have pink spores, and the Cortinarius has the cinnamon spores. This is a lobster mushroom. This is a mushroom that was a Russula brevipes, a short-footed Russula. They come up out of pine duff, and it got rained on, and then secondary fungus took over and turned it into a choice mushroom from being a crappy mushroom, one you would never want to put on your table. But it chemically changed it, and if you scrape off all the red, it gets rid of all the lobster flavor. It actually smells like fish, tastes fishy, and it's got that lobster color. And these guys are Cortinarius sanguineus. Those are the true sanguineus, not semi-sanguineus, and those are great for making dyes. And you have the Rosides caparata. It used to be a Cortinarius, and they put it into its own genus because it doesn't have the right color of spores. And then they put it back into Cortinarius because it has the right shaped spores. But it doesn't have a cortina. It has like a regular veil down here instead of having that cobwebby veil. And I have one over there, the gills are actually kind of a creamier color and not cinnamon colored. This is an antiviral mushroom. My son was coming down with a cold one time when he was about 10 years old, and I brought in a batch, and I dried some up and I gave him to him, and his cold was gone the next day. So maybe it just was a booster for his immune system, or maybe it works all the time, but I usually keep them dried in the house if I have enough in case the flu is going around, hopefully to fight it off. And that's an oak associate. And this is the umbilicatum, the hidden umbilicatum. This is a little sweet tooth. And this is a sarcodon, has gray teeth, and it's in the Rockies and West, it tastes good, and on our part of the country, it tastes very bitter. And it's good for making dye. This is where I went today. This is 10 years ago. I went and picked, I think this was about 140 species at the not the trolley, but at the Say's Rebellion where I went today. But that was probably mid to late August, and we probably had a hurricane that went through. So all these up here are the Cortinarius, and you have tricholomas, which are fall mushrooms, or later fall mushrooms. These are all our chanterelles that we had in there. These are amanitas in this area. And all these wax cap colored mushrooms, these really pretty ones, wax caps. Entelomas, non-gilled corals, and non-gilled mushrooms down here. These are all russulas, and these are all lactarius. We must have had about 25 species of lactarius that day. And these are some of the leaves that we found that day. It's getting late in the year, but porcini should be coming out without bugs in them. And we find porcinis in June, July. You usually have to get them that minute they come out of the ground before the maggots will leave them out and touch the stem, and they just collapse under the weight of your fingers. But this time of the year, they're just like solid meat, like the oyster mushrooms. Midsummer oyster mushrooms, got to get them the day or two after they come out, because they'll be so filled up with maggots inside that you just want to throw them into a pot of salt water and try to get them to get out. If they're too bad, then I won't eat them. But this time of the year, oyster mushrooms can come out and they're just solid meat, and they get darker because they're getting sunburn. The head of the woods can be very, very light colored on the shady side of a tree, and then very dark colored on the sunny side of the tree. So they have a lot of mushrooms are way more related to humans and to animals than they are to plants. But this is a great collection. And then this is in Buddhist Connecticut. Every Labor Day there's a big foray, a Tacoma foray, which is the Connecticut Westchester Mycological Society Association has this big foray in Connecticut, and you get all these Northeast clubs together. So you got 150 people picking mushrooms for 3 to 4 days. And we had, this particular time, there were 80 different kinds of amanitas here. This was 80 different kinds of boletes here. This was the russulas and lactarius table. I don't remember what was back there, but there was also a whole table of polypores, and then people were into the lichens, and we had probably 380 species of mushrooms on the weekend. And we ate well. And then people send me pictures from around the world sometimes. This is from Ireland. I was outside a restaurant telling me which mushrooms are okay to eat and which ones will kill you. That's it. I hope you learned a little.
Yeah.
I talked a lot. Unfortunately, I could do it for hours and hours. That's the ADD thing. You find your passion and you become borderline Asperger's, where I don't catch people's names. I don't catch social cues. And I talk incessantly about stuff nobody wants to hear about.
John, do you ever propagate at home by
I'm not into growing. I have enough going on with just like trying to figure out what all the mushrooms are that I have.
Right.
But anyway,
Do you have friends in the group, the mycology group that do that though on their own property?
oh yeah,
Or-
yeah. I'm just, I have ADD. I'm not that organized. But anyway, I think these are all lactarius and russulas, and these are the ones that are basically food over here. So you got black trumpets. Want to pass these around, and smell it? Tell me if you
And
can
we
smell
can look at the
fruitiness.
shades of the light
These are sweet
better.
tooth mushrooms, and you don't eat this. This is a birch polypore. The birch polypores, anybody ever heard of Utsi, the Iceman, the guy that they found, the 5,000-year-old guy in the Alps? He had this polypore in his backpack. When they're dry, they call it razor strap mushroom, you can sharpen a knife with it. But when they're soft and fleshy, you can make a tea from it and it'll kill intestinal parasites. But if you slice it up and you have a cut, you put it on the cut, it'll stop the bleeding, it's an antiseptic, and it'll stop the pain too, because it's an anesthetic. Very, very good medicinal mushroom. He has a tinder polypore. Tinder polypores are another kind of shelf mushroom that grows on trees, and you can carve out a hole in it and stick an ember in it and close it up and carry fire for up to 3 days in it. And then if you have it really dry and you break it up and put a spark on it, it'll catch right on fire. And he had an artist conch with him too as well. And this is not a good edible mushroom. This is actually purple tooth mushroom. It's a false chanterelle. And then right now, these are out all over the place. Everywhere in the conifer forest, in the hemlock, you're going to find yellowfoot chanterelles. This is a winter chanterelle. Not the greatest chanterelle, but it's definitely an edible mushroom. And over there, this is a hedgehog. I took a spill. I fell down and smashed all this stuff together, so I would have had a much better display. These all have spines on the bottom, same as the sweet tooth. If you take a look at that, you can see they have teeth on the bottom. This is much more robust, and when these are very young and perfect, it looks like a chunk of meringue, nice toasted meringue on the ground. It's just really, really interesting. I had a hard time picking this one out of the ground. And then you have tricholomes. Late fall mushrooms, you get these big, robust mushrooms. And this is actually a brown matsutake, which is not a good mushroom to eat here, but in the West Coast, this is a good mushroom. And then you got, let's see, one more thing. This is the gypsy I was talking about. Now this one has, let's see that hoary frost on the top. I don't know if you can see that from here, but you see that nice white flesh on the top? That's the only, and it's got a nice creamy colored gills, and it's got the actual veil on here. This is that one, this antiviral mushroom.
Do you have chaga there?
I didn't bring any chaga, no.
Is that
It's only on birch.
only in birch, and is it all year? I mean, is it?
Well, some people say you're supposed to harvest it when it's freezing out,
Okay.
but yeah. I'm sure it has plenty of medicinal value if you get it the other time of the year. But the russulas, these guys here, this was a russula, and it's like, you know, they say if you throw a mushroom against a tree and it breaks into 1,000 pieces, it's got to be a russula. I can't imagine that having good mouthfeel, if you know that expression from the chefs, you know. I'm all about mouthfeel. You want to take a walk?
Are those
Yeah.
toothed ones related to lion's mane?
Yes, lion's mane comes out as one clump.
Oh.
Bear's head tooth comes out in shells, and then there's a comb tooth that comes out in long branches. They all have the same, pretty much the same texture, great flavor, and same medicinal
Yeah,
values.
because lion's mane's delicious.
Oh, it's
Yes,
like one of my
I
favorites,
saw
like I
that in
said.
my coffee.
It's like I was saying, it's like crab meat, isn't it?
Yeah,
I know people who actually take that and make
Protein.
false crab cakes
Yeah.
and fool people.
Wow.
Did you pass this all the way around? Everybody get a whiff of that?
Yeah.
Did you smell that fruitiness?
Mm-hmm.
If anybody's got little glasses, you can have a little taste of black trumpet infused vodka later. I brought a bottle with me. If you put 3 of these in here about this size in a pint of vodka, and let it sit for 3 days, it's so good. Somebody said, is it truffle in there? And then somebody else said, is this cognac? You know, I like to sip it. I actually don't drink hard liquor that often, but when I do, it's got to be black trumpet vodka. It took me half an hour to drink a shot. I just love to touch it to my tongue and get that olfactory rush of flavor and earthy mustiness and fruitiness. all
And
in
what is
one.
that called again?
Black trumpet.
Oh, black trumpet, okay.
Yeah.
And is there anything similar that we would mistake it for?
Not if you know what a black trumpet looks like and how it
Yeah.
smells. And like I always tell, like I say, you smell the mushroom. Once you learn that mushroom is right. I mean, there's chanterelles. Chanterelles smell like pumpkin or apricot. And if you smell a false chanterelle, there are actually mushrooms that look like chanterelles, but if they don't smell right, you know it's not the right
Right.
mushroom. But these, you know, it's hard to see these. I mean, we were walking along, and there were a bunch of them, and all these people were just almost stepping on it because they couldn't see them, because you're looking down into a hole in the leaves, you know.
Right.
But I dry those and make sure I have them around for about all year round. I also dice them up really nicely and make onions and butter, and then put it into cream cheese with a little sour cream for dip. And
Wow.
another way to eat them is just I don't know. Those are my two favorite ways.
Right.
And dip, because I used to only find like 3 or 4 at a time, so you know, the vodka's a great way to get, you know, the flavor out of something
Right.
that's so little.
It's fun to make liqueurs also.
Yeah, it's a nice infusion though. Anybody learn anything? Anybody got a question?
When you eat the mushrooms, do you eat the stems as well as the caps?
Depends on the mushrooms. Some mushrooms have very tough stems.
I'm sorry, what?
Some mushrooms have very tough stems. Like fairy ring mushrooms, you ever see those? Those are really, really, really tasty. In French, those are called mousseron, which is probably where the name mushroom comes from. And the caps are fleshy and edible, but the stems are really tough. Marasmius is a group of mushrooms that they're little guys, and there's Marasmius and Mycena. Mycena have very brittle stems. Marasmius will have very tough stems. And those are great flavor. I mean, people dry them and use them for mushroom flavoring, or just sauteing them up. But, you know, it depends on the mushroom, and it also depends. Whenever I pick a mushroom, I always cut across the stem to see if there's any maggot runs in there. There's always lots of times in the summer that you'll see all these little holes and discoloration. There's a mushroom out in the summertime called bicolor bully. It's got really red cap and yellow pores and a red stem. And if you cut across it, there's 4 different varieties of that. If you cut across it and there's these red tubes down in there where the maggots have gone in, you know it's the true bicolor bully. But there's one that has no odor. That one has no odor, and it bruises the gills the pores very slowly. There's other ones that look just like it, and they bruise quickly. And so one of them smells like curry. Some people say you get sick from eating that. I know people who eat that. And one of them smells like beef bouillon. And then there's another one that stains quickly that looks just like those two, or all 3 of those, and it doesn't have any odor at all, and that's pseudo-sensibilis. The one that smells like curry is called sensibilis. And there's one that looks just like it, and it doesn't have that odor, in pseudo-sensibilis.
Is there-
What guide book do you recommend?
If you don't know your mushrooms, I totally recommend getting the Audubon book first, because you don't know your genus. If you get a book and it's all set up according to genus, you can sit there and flip through forever. But if you get a book and it says it's a mushroom that has attached gills and it has a veil, it'll be a whole section of those, and it's set up according to color. And you'll find, you know, in nice shades of color, you go to find whatever you think you have, or the shape of it, and then you go to your text in the back, and Gary put in lookalikes, and also put in edibility rating. But if it's got a lookalike in it and it's got an asterisk in it, it will be in the book. But once you find the lookalikes, then you can go online and look up that and see if it might be that. It's nice having a computer these days. I also, you know, I think everybody should have the Audubon book, first of all, just because it was my Bible for the first 8 years of my mycology world life. My wife used to cry every time I tried a new mushroom. I said, buy me more books. So I get one for Father's Day, Christmas, and my birthday. So I have over 120 books at this point. I pretty much look at them all, because every fall I throw one in each of the bathrooms, and I flip through them while I'm in the bathroom. But I really believe that if you don't know mushrooms, the Audubon book is the way to go to start with. And then if you can get it, get the Phillips book, Mushrooms in North America. It's a really good book. It's got a lot of pictures in it in the different stages of development of the mushrooms. And there's only a few mistakes in it. The guy was from England, and he came and did a tour of the country and took pictures and did a lot of research and put it on. But there's a few mushrooms in there that aren't exactly right. But no, nothing there to kill you. And if you live in an oak forest, there's actually a mushroom book that is mushrooms associated with oak trees. And there's also mushroom books that are specific to boletes and specific to lactarias. And the Bessett's just put one out that had to do with crusts and shelf mushrooms. I've got, you know, and then there's one on tricholomas. So there's a lot of different mushroom books that are specific to something that you might be interested in if you want to become, you know, a specialist in one area or happen to have a lot of one thing. But the Audubon book is the best book to start with. Gives you a clue as to what you're looking at.
So it sounds like in the same species, there's some differences between some of the mushrooms. How about across generations? Do they always have the same characteristics?
Yeah.
Regardless of the year? Or
Yeah.
do they mutate?
I mean, there's minimal changes depending on how much rain you've gotten probably. And like you're saying, if it gets a lot of sun, some mushrooms are more photosensitive, so they'll go darker if they're in the sun and lighter if they're in the shade. I mean, you know, enoki mushrooms, the ones that you get in your Chinese food that are like long, tall, skinny things with teeny tiny heads on them. Those, if you're out in the woods right now and you find stuff on old elm trees and it looks like a bunch of red-capped kind of clusters of mushrooms, that's enoki mushroom. But they've cultivated it in rice cake and they have it in tall glasses with paper around it so it doesn't get any sunlight. And they put a high CO2 atmosphere in it so that the caps won't pin. They don't grow their caps because it's so high CO2. So they can definitely manipulate the way a mushroom works if you're cultivating. And apparently I never tried fuzzy foot, which is what it's called. People say you should peel the skin off the cap of those too because they're very slimy. And a lot of mushrooms, when you have to go through all that process, your fingers are going to get totally black with this slimy stuff that you're pulling off.
Well, what's the best way to clean a mushroom before you eat it? I've heard water,
Well,
it sucks in the
It depends on
water,
if it's a
not
dry
good.
cap or what it is. I mean, when it comes to hand in the woods, I peel them off one frond at a time and just flick off the little bits of dirt and wipe it on a paper towel with a knife. You got little brushes and certain kinds of mushrooms, a little soft brush to brush off the caps. If it's like really gross and dirty, you might not want to eat it at all because unless of course, you know, if you got a whole bunch of mushrooms and then you can be picky about it and you just eat the clean ones. But if you got, you know, 4 or 5 of one mushroom and you say, I'd really like to try it, you can clean it, wash it. But they say don't wash your mushrooms.
Okay.
Like I said, if you're picking for the table, try and clean them as much as you can before you put them in your basket so you have less to do when you get home. It's old dead mushrooms. I think it's old honey mushrooms.
Huh.
Oh, in November we do a lot of mushroom forensics. What's good of that then? Coral. Not in good shape, but there's some coral here. That's called Maria cristata. Yeah, if it's really flimsy like that and it has like little yellow and pink undertones on the bottom, people have been eating that lately. But I know that corals can give you, if you eat a lot of them, they can give you diarrhea. I'm not sure. Probably a Mycena. No, yeah, Mycenas have very brittle stems, but it might be something else. I'm not sure about the color of the gills on these. I think that usually Mycenas have white gills. Yeah, a bunch of them. Same thing. Little teeny tiny mushrooms.
John, those coral mushrooms, sometimes are they purple?
Well, there are purple ones.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Yeah, that's a really pretty one.
Yeah.
But that one there is out of luck. There's a little lacteria. You gotta look at the bottom. If you have pores on the bottom, then they're terpsichore. If you have teeth on the bottom, then they're trichaptum biforme. So they could have teeth or pores on the bottom. So there are 2 forms of it, but that one has little spines on the bottom. See them? So that's a false turkey tail.
That's a false turkey tail.
And then those.
Definite. What's that?
Yeah, what's that?
And it also told him it had been on his body for
I don't know. Get me stumped on that one. I think they look like poison pie, which is something called Hebeloma crustiforme, but I've never seen it growing out of wood before.
So they're edible.
Oh yeah, poison pie. Always, you know it's going to be the best. So this is an old Ipsizygus tessulatus, or elm oyster, but it's not really an oyster mushroom. These guys, probably more Mycena of some sort.
No.
Oh, these might be Gallerina. Hard to tell until the spores start to turn.
What kind of tree is that?
That's a maple.
Oh,
Just your
okay.
stuff in the little bit.
They love rotting maples.
Is it okay to touch these?
Sure. No, as long as you don't ingest them.
Yeah,
You have
okay.
to. There's actually a mushroom poisoning book, a lot like the Audubon book-sized mushroom book, and it has a list of mushrooms, and it'll have a little LD number in the upper corner of the picture, and that LD is how many ounces it would take for you to eat per 100 pounds of your weight to kill you.
Okay.
So if you're looking to get rid of someone, that's the book. That's the book to get. This looks like an old Russula to me. Smells pretty bad.
What about those things, John?
Just mushrooms here on the log. They're probably false turkey tails, or they could be real turkey tails. Depends on whether they have white spores or whether they have little blue teeth. And a lot of these have teeth, and those are false turkey tails.
Oh, if they have teeth, it's false turkey tail.
Right. True turkey tails have a very solid, almost white, no-pored surface on the bottom. But if you've got a lens, you can see how small those spores are. So the spores that they kick out must be really small too. But yeah, they have a white surface on the bottom. And once they start to change, that means they're gone by and there are bugs eating into them, so you probably shouldn't harvest them. I took a class from a guy who was from New Mexico, and he had a friend who was into killing squirrels so that you could eat them. And one time he shot a squirrel in a tree, and the tree didn't come down, so he climbed up into the tree to get the squirrel, and all the branches were lined with mushrooms. So he decided he would take a bunch of rustlers home and put them on his picnic table and photograph which ones they took first, and then he would try those first. But you have to remember that animals of the woods have enzymes in their guts that can deal with poisons that we cannot. But still, it gave him a good idea, and none of these rustlers are basically poisonous as far as I know. So he was just checking out their opinion.
How do we know, aside, no, that's not.
How did mushrooms get hooked, whether they're poisonous or not?
How did people start to try to eat mushrooms and think that it's a good source of nutrition?
I don't know. Probably when they were hungry, they tried it. And
yeah,
everybody
yeah.
asked, how did they first figure out which ones were good mushrooms and which ones were bad mushrooms? I would imagine they watched the animals, fed them to their animals, fed them to the captives, and whatever happened, they figured out whether it was survival or not for the family.
Well, they could have
And
made.
if the captive has the mushrooms and then figures out where you lost your keys 6 months ago, he became the shaman. That was the mushroom that you would take to keep your spiritual state going.
What about those psychedelic mushrooms?
What about?
Did they grow around here?
Psilocybin or something? Psilocybin, yeah.
Here's a little amanita.
We're using it a lot now for.
That is a little waxy cap,
Yeah.
probably. Has it got widely spaced gills on the bottom? No, this is a little Russula. It's probably Russula. It's not fragilis, but it's definitely a very routine one. So this is an amanita where it has the striations around the top. It has no veil, and it's coming out of a cup down here. And this is actually the one they call the tawny grisette, which is the most eaten mushroom in the wild in France. So,
Oh, wow.
but again, it's an amanita. If you make a mistake with these suckers, it's emergency room and possibly a coffin.
Wow.
But this is a great one to look at. You see that cup it comes out of? You see this little fleshy stuff down here?
Is this the one you said you picked many before you added?
Oh no, that was the Amanita rubescens. This is a grisette, but somebody just said it at a foray that all the grisettes are basically edible, but I don't believe in taking any chances unless I have an expert who's eaten them before with me.
Don't want to make your wife cry.
I certainly don't like making Judy cry, that's right. This is a pigskin puffball that's falling over.
Oh, pigskin.
Yeah, now there's something. What it's called foamies, fomitopsis.
Yeah, it's got foam all the way down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to do this again. If you want to do it next year, do it in late August.
Okay.
Okay.
But it's also colder up here, so it's a little bit behind the first program was due.
It's a little bit behind what?
As far as cold, I mean, winter's coming faster here. This is all deadly Gallerina here.
Deadly.
Deadly Gallerina, yeah. They have, no, this is Gymnopolis penetrans. Deadly Gallerina has brownish spores. This is in the same family as a big laughing Jim.
Is it edible?
Oh, no.
No. Okay. Oh, here's more. Look at these more of these. Shelf mushrooms.
They could be, considering that's a conifer, they could be Fomes pinicola, named for on pines.
There's a jelly.
That looks like an old polypore. It might be reishi. Wow.
Whoa.
It might be what? Old reishi. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, I'll say that was reishi. Doesn't really, no, it looks like it's just another polypore. Because reishi has a stem. These guys don't have a stem.
On all sides.
Yeah. I don't think that's reishi.
There's a big one on the ground over there.
Yeah. Now, you know what it looks like? It looks like, that looks like Dyer's polypore. So that could be like a massive source of like dye.
Oh, so John, I picked this off
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is.
and I see it there.
Yeah. So I think it's
The same thing?
Fomes or can't remember the genus name, but pinicola because it's growing on pine.
Doesn't
Yeah,
that
that's
look
the same
like...
thing.
Oh, is it?
Mm-hmm.
So is that
interesting.
similar to what this photo is? That had one small one and then it had...
I don't think so. This
No.
is, see, when these are nice and dry, this is like almost hairy on top. And this is, you know, when it's young and fresh, and see how it comes down the stem like
Right.
that. So that's called a little bit decurrent. And when they have really huge gills like this and they go down the stem, I think it might be called plinthogallis. So if anybody knows anything about architecture, a plinth is like a support. So I think it might be plinthogallis. If the gills were a little tighter, it would be ligniotis, which is meaning it's going to probably digest and break down lignin. And there's a couple of different ones, and this might be the other third one. I'm not sure. But they're fun. They're not edible. They'll burn your tongue.
What are you going to do with all of these things? What are you going to do with all of these?
Give them to anybody who wants them.
Oh, I
I'll
see.
throw them away. You know, some people like to draw. I don't know.
I thought mushrooms grew better when it was a wet year. Do they like moisture generally?
Because I've been in my garden a lot of things coming out of the wood chips.
Check out these
Yeah.
little yellow cup funguses.
Oh yeah.
And then right here, these are old wolf slime. They had pink wolf slime before. Now it's kind of purpley spore print. But when they're really fresh, they'll squirt out pink all over the place.
Oh, look at this down there. That is.
Oh, yeah.
That's that
The
coral.
coral.
Again. And then you got a lactarius right here with a little nipple on top.
Wow. They're poison, right? When they're
I don't think they're good.
yeah. Oh wow.
Not good, but they are, and they're not even oyster mushrooms. They're called Panis serotinus, and they get to be, you know, big, and they get to be green, and I don't know, maybe some people eat it, but I don't. If you know where there's a nice fast-moving stream with a lot of hemlock along it, you might find matsutake.
Oh, really?
Polita sedulets, that porcini should be coming out. And cut off the dirty stuff and dry it and use it in tea. And it's just so good for you.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Oh, and it's called Termites versicolor because that can have blue lines in it, red, orange, yellow, green, all kinds of colors in those bands. And it depends on the type of tree it's on, probably.
There were other ones that looked similar, but they were like
They had teeth on the bottom.
bleached and stuff. Yeah.
Those are all from last year, probably. When you want to have the really nice white, pure pore surface.
But there's nothing that looks like that.
I mean, that one's it's starting to get a couple of little bug marks on it, so it's still good to try to get into a dryer.
So there's nothing that looks
But
like
another
that.
couple of weeks, no. I mean, there is. There's one called a hirsutum, it's much furrier on top.
But that's still edible.
I don't know. I mean, there's a few different termites, and they're all very fine pored mushrooms. Yeah, just looking at wood can be a real source of fascination.
Yeah. I mean, you've just made us look closer.